Slaughterhouse-Five by Brandon Rosenfeld. Slaughterhouse-Five is a novel written by World War II survivor, as well as a Dresden firebombing survivor, Kurt Vonnegut. Throughout the book, he follows the life of Billy Pilgrim, another World War II veteran who also survived the Dresden firebombing. The book is in chronological order of Billy's life and takes you throughout the events he has lived through. It consists of many flashbacks and events Billy went through the war and after, and shows how war plays a role in a person's life. One of the main characters in the story is Billy Pilgrim, a World War II veteran and a survivor of the Dresden firebombing. Billy's life was largely affected by the events he lived through, and these events stayed with him for the rest of his life. One of the quotes in the story says, "He has seen his birth and death many times," he says, and pays random visits to all the events in between, he says. This quote gives the reader the understanding that Billy is not completely right in the head after the war. He is always traveling randomly through his life and having flashbacks to these terrible events he went through. Another quote that relates to Billy is, while he examined the boy's eyes, Billy told him matter-of-factly about his adventures on Tralfamadore, assured the fatherless boy that his father was very much alive, still in moments the boy would see again and again. "Isn't that comforting?" Billy asked. Billy is explaining his alien encounters while talking to a young boy. To Billy, this topic is normal, but is very odd to anyone else. Another main character in the story is Kurt Vonnegut, who is the author of the book. Kurt Vonnegut was a prisoner of war and also a survivor of the Dresden firebombing. One of the quotes in the story that relates to Kurt is, "People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to do it anymore. I've finished my war book now. The next one I write is going to be fun. This one is a failure and had to be, since it was written by a pillar of salt." This quote shows that Vonnegut wants the reader to understand that writing a book about war was not easy, because war is by no means an easy topic. It was hard for him to write, and he does not want to write another war book because it brought back so many traumatic events that he lived through. Another main character in the story is Ronald Weary, a soldier taken by the Germans along with Billy Pilgrim in the war. Ronald is known for saving Billy's life in an attempt to be heroic. In the story, it says, "Saved your life again, you dumb bastard." Weary said to Billy in the ditch he had been saving Billy's life for days, cursing him, kicking him, slapping him, making him move. Ronald wanted to be superior to others and wanted to be looked at as heroic. In this quote, he wanted Billy to feel that way and feel like he needed Ronald to be able to survive. The main conflict in the story is Billy Pilgrim and his PTSD from the war. Once Billy returns home from the war and tries to live a normal, happy life, he struggles to be able to do that. The events he lived through during the war have caused him to have a difficulty living a great life and have traumatized him for the years to come. I think the main question of the story was, will Billy ever be able to get over his PTSD and live a normal life without worrying or believing that everything in his life is connected to the war and the traumatic events he lived through? I had two main thoughts after reading this book. My first one was that a different point of view would have made the story a lot better. I wish the book was written by Billy and in his point of view instead of Kurt Vonnegut's. The book would have been more enjoyable if written in Billy's point of view because we would have gotten his story in his words. It would have been more detailed and easier to paint a picture in the reader's head. At times, I felt if Kurt was just describing anything he could without being in Billy's shoes when describing the events that Billy lived through himself. Secondly, I thought the book was very intriguing and extremely fascinating topic. The book was very intriguing and interesting due to the fact that we got to follow the life of someone who has witnessed so many traumatic events and seeing how he was affected by them. Being able to follow Billy's life after the war really showed how effective soldiers can be when returning home from a war. There were a few cons I had about this book after reading it. The first one was that I thought coming from Kurt Vonnegut's point of view weakened the story at times. I would have enjoyed the story even more if it was from Billy's own perception and memory. Coming from his point of view would have made it better and more interesting. It would have felt more real and not like Kurt was just trying to add details to the events that Billy lived through. One of the quotes that proves this says, Billy Pilgrim had not heard this anecdote, but lying on the black there, Billy stared into the patina of the corporal's boots, saw Adam and Eve in the golden depths. They were naked. They were so innocent, so vulnerable, so eager to behave decently. Billy Pilgrim loved them. This quote shows how Kurt was writing and explaining a situation Billy lived through himself. I would have been a lot more intrigued if Billy wrote about it because it would have been even more detailed and real due to the fact that Billy witnessed it firsthand. My second con was that the first chapter made it hard to follow, and sometimes I caught myself not interested in the text. The first chapter of this book, purposely, was very random and unneeded. Kurt made the first chapter nothing important and very off topic, and I got very lost and bored at times. A quote from the first chapter says, and I let the dog out, or I let him in, and we talk some. I let him know I like him, and he lets me know he likes me. He doesn't mind the smell of mustard, gas, and roses. This quote has no relevance to any part of the story, and I felt as if much of the first chapter was like this. Throughout the book, there was some potentially offensive content. There was violence throughout the book due to the fact that the book was about the life of a soldier in a war. Obviously, some of the events Billy went through were very violent, and that had to be portrayed in this book. There was some profanity throughout the book, which I won't quote because I do not need you, Miss Laposy, to be mad at me. He used some profanity and quoted choice language of certain characters and dialogue that they had. After reading this book, there were many pros. One of the first pros was that following Billy's life and how he acted was very intriguing and interesting. I was really intrigued following Billy's life from before the war, during the war, and after the war. It was very interesting seeing the effects the war had on him throughout his whole entire life. Some quotes from the story were, Billy's daughter Barbara came in later that day. She was all doped up, had the same glassy-eyed look that poor old Edgar Derby wore just before he was shot in Dresden. Another one was, a siren went off, scared the hell out of him. He was expecting World War III at any time. The siren was simply announcing high noon. These quotes show how even years and years after the war, Billy always found a way to connect present events back to the events he lived through many years in the past. These traumatizing events were fascinating, but very upsetting, seeing how the PTSD he had changed him forever. The second pro was that it was very interesting getting detailed and real imagery and situations Billy had lived through the war. War is a very serious topic and something I won't ever witness firsthand. I enjoyed reading situations soldiers went through and learning about what they had to overcome. Kurt gives a lot of detail and events Billy lived through during the war, and it was really intriguing and mind-blowing reading it. One quote says, when the bombers got back to their base, the steel cylinders were taken from the racks and shipped back to the United States of America, where factories were operating night and day, dismantling the cylinders, separating the dangerous contents into minerals. The minerals were then shipped to specialists in remote areas. It was their business to put them into the ground, to hide them cleverly so that they won't hurt anybody ever again. This quote shows how Kurt wrote about an event that made the reader intrigued by including a lot of detail and events to paint a picture in the reader's head. I loved getting to read it and paint a picture of what it would look like since I will never witness an event near it. Finally, this is my works cited. Thank you for a great year, Miss Laposy, and all of us will miss you a lot next year.